In our business scenario, OEC computers would like to see the difference in amounts between invoices and the amounts given on credit memos. This will tell them a net amount of sales, invoices minus credit memos. We could use the existing sales analysis semantic layer, but for learning purposes, we are creating our own models to perform this function. We will create a union between the two cubes for invoices and credit memos and then compare the measures for document totals and tax. To make the comparison, we will create calculated columns to subtract the values from credit memos from the values in invoices. In the Systems tab, we can open the package containing our models. We see the two dimensions and the cube for invoices that we created in previous demos. We also see a calculation view for credit memos that was created in the same manner as the cube for invoices. In the projection node for this cube, we see the credit memo table Origin. In the start join, we see that the data foundation of Origin is joined to the same dimensions we used in the invoice cube. In the Semantics node, we see the two measures for document total and VAT sum for the credit memo documents. Notice that the columns in this cube have the same names as the ones in the invoice cube we previously built. Now we are ready to build the model for our union. Right-click on the package to show the context menu. We choose New. We create a name in the usual way. We use the first few characters for the customer namespace. In this case, our demo company is OEC Computers, so we mark the models for this company with OEC. You could use any identifier here that makes sense for your purpose. Using the same prefix at the beginning of each name makes it easy to search for the models that you have created. You always know that there will be no confusion with the SAP defined models. It will never be overridden by a semantic layer when you deploy your models. Following the namespace, we put information about the function this calculation view performs. We enter the name OEC Union, Invoice, Credit Memo, Query. And we give it a description, net sales query. Notice that the package has defaulted in. The view type is of course a calculation view with the subtype graphical. The data category is cube. Then we can click Finish. Now we want to create a union between the two cubes we have created. We click on the union icon on the left and place it into the graphical area. Now we add our cubes to the union. We drag the cube for invoices onto the union node. Then we drag the cube for the credit memos and place it onto the union node. In the details window, you will see two areas, source and target. Notice that the columns from the invoice cube and the credit memo cubes have the same names. You may wish to expand this area by decreasing the area of the error log so that you can display more of the fields. So you can use the maximize icon. Or you can restore it back via clicking the restore item. A union adds all of the records from the invoice cube and the credit memo cube together. To do this, we link the names which are the same. The card code from the invoice and the card code field from the credit memo should be matched. We create a union by dragging the fields to the target area and matching them. We can see the lines from the two fields joining together in one field in the target. Because the columns are the same, we can save time by using the auto mapping function. We choose the icon Automap by name. Now we see everything with the same name is mapped together in the target fields. We remove the mapping on the two total columns and the two VAT sum columns because we would like to see both fields available in our report. To show these fields in our query, we need to drag each measure from the source window to the target window. Now we drag over the doc total and the VAT sum from the credit memo. Notice that when we drag over the doc total from the credit memo cube, it is renamed in the target area as doc total 1. The same thing happens when we bring over VAT sum from the credit memo. Later in the semantics node, we will rename the measures for the credit memo so that they will be easy to understand for our report users. Now we can connect the union node to the aggregation node by drawing a line. Then we add all the columns to the output. We can use click and shift to choose all the columns and use the option Add to Output. Now we go to the semantics node to rename and change labels for columns. In the semantic node, we see that the columns we have added to the output. At this point, we can rename the two fields from the credit memo cube so that they will be easier to work with both inside the modeler and in queries. We rename doc total 1 to doc total CM. And give it the label credit total. We rename VAT sum 1 to VAT sum CM. And give it the label credit VAT. To make it easier for users, we will also change the labels for the invoice measures. We set the label for doc total to invoice total. And we set the label for VAT sum to invoice VAT. We have added all our columns to our new query view, but we still need to create a comparison between the measures in each cube. We want to add columns that compare the invoice totals to credit memo totals. It is best to do any calculated columns after data is gathered and aggregated, so we choose the aggregation box just before the semantics node. In the output area for the aggregation node, we right-click on Calculated Columns and choose New Calculated Column. We give it a name called Total and a label called Doc Total. We choose decimal as data type, use a length of 22 and set the scale to 6. When working with calculated columns, it is important to think about the data type you are using and choose the appropriate length and scale to avoid rounding differences. We set the calculated column as a measure. Now we create a formula. Even though we think of a credit memo as negative, the data is stored as a positive value. Therefore, we have to subtract the credit memo document total from the invoice document total. We choose doc total from the invoice within the element tab. Then we put a minus sign within the operators and choose the document total from the credit memo. Now we can check the syntax of the expression by clicking the Validate Syntax button. And we got the message that it's a valid expression. Then we can choose OK. Then we perform the same for the VAT sum total. In the output area for the aggregation node, we right-click on Calculated Columns and choose New Calculated Column. We give it a name, VAT total, and set a label, total VAT. We choose decimal as data type, use a length of 15, and set the scale to 2 because currency amounts have 2 decimals. Make sure to set the column type to measure. And once again we subtract the credit memo measure from the invoice measure. We choose VAT sum from the invoice within the element tab. Then put a minus sign. And we choose the VAT sum from the credit memo. Check the syntax of the expression by clicking the Validate Syntax button and choose OK. We return to the Semantics node to check the columns that will be available for our query. We set a data type for each column. We make sure to set the type for the docnum to attribute so that it doesn't try to add document numbers together. Same with the timestamp, it is also an attribute. Now we can use the auto-assign functionality to automatically assign the types to the corresponding fields. We can see that the calculated columns have been added to the list. On the far right, we have the option to hide any columns that we do not plan to use in our queries. For example, we could hide the date timestamp field if we don't want that level of granularity in the query. We click Save and Validate, and Save and Activate. Now we can do a data preview to check our view. We choose the Raw Data tab to have a look at the measures. We see some question marks that indicate null values. This is not an issue. We are looking at the data currently at the level of the date timestamp, so we see each document separately. Now we choose the Analysis tab. We put year in the label axis. In the value axis, we add document total credit memo, and our calculated measure total. We can see the total column is equal to doc total minus the doc total credit memo. You have just seen how to create a view that makes a union between two cubes and allows you to compare totals from two document types.